Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, presented by Amity University, ranked amongst the top 3% universities globally. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
The French Parliament is debating a new law, a law that will impact not just the people of France, but serve as a template for the rest of Europe, indeed the rest of the world. It's a law to curb Islamic extremism, and this is something that President Emmanuel Macron had proposed a few months back. France saw a string of Islamist attacks. Radicalism was obviously a problem. Foreign funding of mosques and gaps in the law made things worse. Macron vowed to change this. He came under attack from the men who call themselves the leaders of the Muslim world. The likes of Turkey's President Erdogan, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan and Malaysia's Mahathir Mohamad. The leaders who remain silent on China's persecution of Muslims but call the French president names. There were protests against France and its leader in many parts of the world. We've covered all of this on the show. Now that bill has reached the French Parliament. By most estimates, it will be passed in both houses. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll tell you what this new law entails, what it means for France, for Macron's politics in an election year, and for the rest of the world. Also on the show, images from the Ladakh border. India and China are disengaging. They will fully disengage by this weekend, we are told. In the UK, yet another variant of the Wuhan virus has emerged with troubling mutations. In Antarctica, scientists have found life under 3,000 feet of ice. And in Japan, they'll now have a minister of loneliness. What for? We'll tell you. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Demonstrators in Myanmar blocked railway lines and even the country's central bank as protests against the military coup intensified. The United Nations Special Envoy has warned Myanmar's army of severe consequences for any harsh response to the protests. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison has promised a thorough investigation into the government's workplace culture after a woman alleged she was raped in the country's parliament by an unnamed colleague. The World Health Organization has given emergency use approval to Serum Institute of India's Covishield vaccine. The jab forms the bulk of batches being lined up through WHO's COVAX program aimed at equitable vaccine distribution. Two Hong Kong democracy activists pleaded guilty to organizing or participating in an illegal assembly during anti-government protests in 2019. The two activists are among 9 prominent activists whose trial is underway in Hong Kong. French President Emmanuel Macron urged more aid for the G5 Sahel forces during the G5 Sahel summit. Chad is expected to announce a deployment of 1,000 troops to the tri-border region of Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali. The troops are expected to reinforce national armies that are battling Islamist insurgents. A volley of rockets targeting a U.S. airbase in Iraq's Kurdistan region killed a foreign civilian contractor and wounded 8 others, including Americans. This is the worst attack in a year on the U.S.-led military coalition. A vaccination scandal in Peru has led to a series of high-profile resignations. The president has said an investigation is underway after it emerged that government officials were secretly vaccinated ahead of the health workers. Peru's Foreign Minister Elizabeth Astete stepped down on Monday amid a public outcry. Rare heavy snow covered Athens as part of a cold weather front, sending temperatures plunging from the low 20s to well below freezing. Heavy snowfall was predicted for central, southern and eastern Greece, including on the southern island of Crete. India have drawn level in the 4-match series against England after winning the second test in Chennai by 317 runs. England started the day at 53 for 3, needing another 429 runs for an improbable win, but were soon in trouble against the Indian spinners. Akshar Patel grabbed a maiden 5-wicket haul, while Ravichandran Ashwin and Kuldeep Yadav shared the other 5 wickets as the visitors were bowled out for 164. Ashwin was named man of the match as India rose to second in the ICC World Test Championship standings. Defending champion Novak Djokovic remains on course for a record-extending 9th men's singles title at the Australian Open after a come-from-behind 4-sets win over 6th seed Alexander Zverev. The world number 1 won a seesaw battle in 3.5 hours and will face Russian qualifier Aslan Karatsev next. In the women's draw, veteran Serena Williams thrashed world number 2 Simona Halep to reach a record-equaling 9th semi-final at Melbourne Park. That win set up a clash against 3rd seed Naomi Osaka, who beat Taiwan's Su Sei.
In February 2016, no opinion poll in France cared to test the name Emmanuel Macron. Macron was a political nobody. He had no electoral experience. 1 year later, he won the election and became the president of France. That was in 2017. In 2020, Macron entered untested waters again. A centrist leader trying to fight radical Islam without becoming Islamophobic. There aren't many such. What the French president is trying to do is long overdue, making a clear distinction between Islamophobia and fighting extremism, steering clear of appeasement politics to do what needs to be done. It's a new political template, and the world is watching closely. Emmanuel Macron faces another election next year, and he is perhaps betting his re-election on this template of politics. Last year, France witnessed 2 terrorist attacks. A teacher was beheaded in Paris, and 3 people were stabbed to death. Macron declared a war against radical Islam. There was a crackdown on suspected radicals. Hundreds were arrested. A mosque was closed. Now the president is writing the final chapter of this war. Despite the outrage from the Islamic world and relentless and personal attacks from leaders like Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey and Imran Khan of Pakistan, President Macron of France is pushing for a law that is designed to tackle radical Islam. Later today, this bill will be put up for a vote in the lower house of the French parliament. The lawmakers are expected to pass it. The bill will then go to the French Senate or the upper house. It may choose to make some amendments, but lawmakers are expected to greenlight the new law there as well, in the upper house too. There are 7 things that you must know about this law. Number 1, it has specific measures to tackle hate speech and separatism online against government workers. Under this new law, anyone who spreads hate against public sector employees in France with an intent to harm them faces up to 3 years in jail and a fine of $55,000. A guilty verdict on the charge of separatism could lead to 7 years in jail and a fine of $91,000. If any foreigner commits these crimes, they could be banned from France. Here's provision number 2. New rules for mosques in France. Mosques that get foreign funding. In fact, this law covers all associations that get public funding. They must sign a Republican contract of engagement. It's a charter of sorts that broadly rejects the idea of political Islam and rejects any foreign interference, especially on matters of religion. New rule number 3 is on homeschooling. Homeschooling will now need to be authorized by the state. So far it was self-declared, but now you need permission if the law is passed. This measure will guard against radical religious education in mosques and madrasas. Rule number 4, punishment for doctors who provide virginity certificates. They could be fined $18,000 and put behind bars for 1 year for issuing such certificates. Rule number 5, stricter controls over foreign funding of religious organizations. Those who get more than $12,000 from abroad must declare it in their annual accounts that the French government can access. Rule number 6, special provisions for policing places of worship to stop hate preachers. This includes increasing penalties and even closing down some places of worship. And finally, provision number 7, an extended ban on religious symbols. For civil servants, public sector employees and private contractors of public services, they're all prohibited from wearing religious symbols like the hijab, even the cross. They cannot voice their political views in public. How is France responding to these proposals? Like with all reform, this too is being met with some protests. Before the bill was put to vote in Parliament, activists took to the streets. They claim that the new law is discriminatory and targets all Muslims in France. This country has 5.7 million Muslims, the largest Muslim community in Europe. Protesters say the new law turns all of them into potential suspects. Among the detractors are 100 imams, 50 teachers in Islamic sciences, and 50 presidents of associations in France. Reports say they signed an open letter on the 10th of this month calling the Republican Charter, quote-unquote, unacceptable. But the Macron government denies all these charges. Here is how they defended the new law in Parliament.
It is a nice text which protects freedoms. It is a nice text for secularism. It is not naive nor hysterical. It is only compliant with the principles of the Republic, so everybody can live freely, express their religion, be able to pray or not to pray if they want. Today, ladies and gentlemen of the Parliament, you make the law, and the government will be open to any proposal in the next 15 days. Faithful with its notion that the Republic must stay the way it is, faithful to the Constitution of General Charles de Gaulle, faithful to the 1905 law, faithful to the history of France. Thank you.
The new law has not been made in a silo. For 2 weeks, French MPs participated in heated debates about the bill. The debates lasted a total of 135 hours. The lawmakers went through 51 articles of the new law. Some 1,700 amendments were proposed. 313 of them have been accepted. This only goes on to show how serious France is about tackling radical Islam. What about the French president, Emmanuel Macron, the man who has changed the DNA of French politics? From a liberal icon to a leader who does not fit any particular political definition, Emmanuel Macron has come a long way. His recent policies have gained him an equal amount of followers and haters. His brand of politics has broken out of the classic left-right division. But this brand is going to face a serious challenge in the days to come. France is going to polls, and centrist Macron is up against a far-right rival. Someone who promises to do everything the French president does, 2 times better. Where does this leave Mr. Macron? What can he do to stay on in power? Here's all you need to know.
Emmanuel Macron, the youngest French leader since Napoleon. He was the blue-eyed boy of liberal politicians in 2017. A former banker who was going to reboot the French economy and society. Some said he was France's answer to Barack Obama. But 4 years later, the analogy seems wrong. Macron is no Obama. He has refused to be trapped by political definitions. The French president has broken out of the classic left-right division. He's tackling climate change.
This will be the battle of the century. Our ability to invent a new way of living and doing things sustainably.
D'habiter, de faire.
He's fighting Islamic extremism.
L'islam est une religion
Islam is a religion that is in crisis today all over the
dans
world.
notre pays.
Macron has thrown the traditional rule book of politics out of the window. So far, all has gone according to plan. But 2021 poses a peculiar challenge to his brand of politics. France will go to polls in 14 months from now. And centrist Macron's main challenger is Marine Le Pen, the 52-year-old leader of the far-right National Rally. She is currently polling neck and neck with Emmanuel Macron. The most recent polls show Macron might get 24% of the votes in the first round, while Le Pen could secure more than 26. The French finance minister himself says that Le Pen could very well win the next presidential polls. This political possibility can be explained by Le Pen's brand of politics. If Macron wants to align Islam with French values, Le Pen is not afraid to blame Muslims for all of France's ills. If Macron wants to keep foreign influence on Muslims under check, Le Pen wants France to put an end to its multiculturalism. The challenge is significant. There's a raging pandemic in France, the return of a political debate on immigration, growing resentment against Islam, and a highly polarized electorate. The race is anything but predictable. Macron's recent policies have been game-changing, but they may have also cost him some of his traditional left-leaning support base. His main challenger is on the extreme right and promises to do everything the president does 2 times better. Macron is on politically tricky terrain. He will have to get the balance right. And the anti-extremism bill will be his toughest political test. It may well create a template, not just for France, but for European politics. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
EU member states are home to more than 25 million Muslims. 5.7 million of them live in France. It is home to Europe's largest Muslim population, a population that was once referred to as migrants. Most Muslims came to Europe after the Second World War, around the 1950s. They began working in sectors seen as dirty or jobs seen as difficult, like building roads or working in coal mines. North Africans migrated to France. Indonesians and Surinamese went to Holland. Indians, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis went to the UK. Turkish and Kurdish labourers went to Germany. Turkey and Germany were allies in the Second World War, you would remember. A Cold War and couple of generations later, the Muslim population in Europe has found itself in a tight spot. Look at France, for example. While seven Muslim players led the country to the 2018 Football World Cup victory, there were also Muslims who were found guilty of attacking the Charlie Hebdo office in 2015, or beheading a teacher on the outskirts of Paris in 2020, or stabbing people in Nice, or driving a truck over Bastille Day revelers in 2016. Also in a tight spot is France. It is walking a tightrope between extremism and Islamophobia. This is also true for the rest of Europe. These countries are looking at France closely. They're taking notes on how France addresses the problem, because this country hosts the largest Muslim population in Europe. In the last few months, France has refused to appease minorities. It has withstood international criticism and upheld the right to blaspheme. Also that it can safeguard secularism and its people from extremism. Like we said, France now is writing the final chapter in this fight. The question is whether France is setting the right example for Europe. It is definitely focusing on the root of radicalization. It is trying to nip the problem in the bud. From institutions like schools and sporting clubs, France is re-anchoring secularism, drawing a line between rights and religion. For example, the bill halts issuing a virginity certificate, the practice of polygamy, forced marriage. These are issues that have more to do with consent and civility, if you may. They're not about religion, really, and it's very important to underline this. This bill also takes into account the changing online reality. It makes it easier to delist websites promoting hate speech or detain people promoting an attack on public sector employees. Again, it's the need of the hour. That said, the French bill is not all black and white, and we must say this here. This is what critics say. Allowing authorities to pull shutters on institutions without court orders leaves ample room for injustice. Requiring government permission for homeschooling runs contrary to the idea of personal choice. If radical Islam is a 2021 reality, so is Islamophobia, so is human rights violations. France will have to ensure that this bill strikes the right balance. President Macron must fight radical Islam without further marginalizing French Muslims. Experts will tell him about the links between prejudice and terror. France must avoid quoting it. It is critical because, as we said, France is setting an example for the European Union, not for the sake of silencing some Muslim leaders, the ones who accuse Macron of Islamophobia while maintaining a deafening silence on Muslims in China. He should do this for the sake of the 5.7 million Muslims in France and for the millions outside it, most of whom are neither radical nor extremist, people who are just as troubled by violence as their fellow Caucasian citizens. Macron must ensure that his country secures the future of its citizens, irrespective of their religion. Puts the law above religion for all. It is not going to be easy, but it would be the right thing to do. Let's now discuss the disengagement. It was announced last week, and now Indian and Chinese forces are pulling back in Pangong Tso. The standoff, though, is far from over, and New Delhi is maintaining pressure on Beijing in other ways. Here's a report.
These positions were held by the Chinese. They are now dismantling their camps, loading their trucks, and moving back. For almost a year, these areas on the border in Ladakh were witness to an eyeball-to-eyeball military standoff. But after India and China reached an agreement last week, the disengagement from Pangong Tso seems to be moving smoothly. India and China could complete the disengagement by the end of this week. The bulk of it is happening in the Fingers area, between Fingers 4 and 8. The troops are dismantling any structures built after April 2020. Once the disengagement is completed, both India and China have agreed not to conduct any patrolling in this area. While the de-escalation at the border is welcome, the standoff is not yet over. Some outstanding issues still remain. And New Delhi cannot afford to lower the guard. The Indian government intends to maintain pressure on China by working with allies as the disengagement continues along the border in Ladakh. In Rajasthan, India is hosting the American military. A 2-week-long exercise between the two militaries began last week. The drill is an annual affair, but this year it is being seen as Joe Biden's first move to exert pressure on China through one of the Quad partners.
The promises I made, and we all know
the Quad is an informal alliance between India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. It's being called the Asian NATO. The conversation around the Quad has gathered steam in recent weeks. Reports say Washington is planning the first Quad summit. The Biden administration has proposed an online meeting of the leaders of the 4 countries. Such an event would be the first interaction at the highest levels, after former U.S. President Donald Trump put his weight behind the alliance in 2017. New Delhi seems keen on participating in the proposed summit. In his first call with US President Joe Biden, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi agreed to cooperate for a free and open Indo-Pacific. And the Quad. The Quad came up for discussion again last week when US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken spoke to India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. The two leaders conducted a review of the developments in the Indo-Pacific. India has reaffirmed its faith in the Quad partnership and pledged greater support for the future. The de-escalation at the border gives New Delhi an opening to reinforce its defenses against China, with some help from allies. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Now let me ask you a question. Do governments fire tear gas on citizens just because it had been unused for a long time? Only because the government wanted to test how effective the tear gas is? Well, most governments don't. But Pakistan likes to be the exception. So it tests tear gas on people because why not? This is what happened a few days back. We carried a report on protests in Islamabad. Pakistan federal government employees had hit the streets. They wanted a 40% hike in their salaries. The Pakistan government responded with tear gas, several cubic meters of tear gas. Our correspondent Anas Malik, who was present at the protest, could not breathe properly. There was so much tear gas in the air. We thought the shelling was done to disperse the protesters. Turns out it was just for fun. And the man telling the world about this is Sheikh Rashid Ahmed, the man on your screen, the Interior Minister of Pakistan and Chaudhry Fawad Hussein's main rival in being the biggest joke of Pakistan, it turns out. Mr. Sheikh Rashid says the Islamabad police fired a little tear gas on the protesters because the canisters had not been used for a long time. They were just trying to test the tear gas, he says. You have to watch it to believe it.
आज लोग समझ रहे हैं कि शायद वो हमने अभी 25% तनख्वाहों में इजाफा किया है, थोड़ी बहुत टीयर गैस भी चलाई है, वो भी जरूरी होती है, क्योंकि टीयर गैस चलाना भी टेस्ट करना चाहिए टीयर गैस को, कि बड़े अरसे की बेकार पड़ी हुई थी। सो उसकी थोड़ी सी टेस्टिंग की है, ज्यादा नहीं की है, और ज्यादा महफूज है हमारे पास।
You heard that. We only tested it a little, he says. He talks as if they were firecrackers. This minister thinks that suffocating people is a joke. In any other country, a statement like this would cause outrage. The minister in question would be forced to apologize, even resign, but not in Pakistan. In other news, the passport of Pakistan's former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has expired. Why is this news? Because Nawaz Sharif is currently in exile in London. He has been living there since November 2019. He faces charges of corruption in Pakistan. He won't be issued a new passport or get a renewal on the existing one, which means his options are limited. He will have to stay in the UK if he plans on remaining in exile, and in case London and Islamabad strike a deal and Nawaz Sharif's visa is revoked, he will have no choice but to return to Pakistan. But as of today, the 16th of January, Pakistan has no extradition treaty with Britain. We'll tell you if that changes. Meanwhile, the world is struggling to find a template to deal with this, the mutating Wuhan virus. A new variant has been found in the United Kingdom with troubling mutations. It has already spread to as many as 10 countries, and this comes at a time when leading world powers are struggling to get their hands on vaccines. Our next report has more.
The Wuhan virus is fighting back, with newer mutations now being detected almost every week. The United Kingdom faces the risk of becoming a virus melting pot. Another new variant has been detected here, and it has already begun spreading around the world. This variant is called the B1525. So far, it has been detected in at least 10 countries. This includes Denmark, the United States, and Nigeria. The earliest sequence of this variant dates back to December. At least 32 people in the United Kingdom have been infected with this mutation. British experts are already considering revaccinating the population, even as millions of citizens are still waiting for their first shot.
In terms of COVID revaccination, there are essentially two reasons potentially to do this. One of which is if immunity is starting to wane, and we don't really know how long we will have to have between revaccinations. It might be a long period, it might be short. It's too early really to tell. And the second reason is if we end up with variants of the virus that can escape around the immunity which the vaccine provides. And there's, I think, reasonable evidence that we may have to do that this year.
A week ago, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the citizens should get used to the idea of revaccination. But for a world that's already running short on jabs, where will the European powers get more shots? The struggle in Europe is real. The European Union's vaccination programme suffered yet another setback. After delays with the Oxford vaccine, Moderna says its deliveries will have to be delayed to March.
Moderna is indeed one of the companies with which we have a contract, which has been approved and work is ongoing. As things stand at the moment, we've been told that there are a few days for deliveries in February, but it's likely that they will be resolved in March.
Qui seront réservés en mois de mars.
Halfway across the world, Japan is struggling with a shortage of a different kind. They don't have the right syringes for the Pfizer shot. Japan has made urgent requests for special needles, the kind that can extract 6 doses from each vial. With the regular needles, they only get 5 doses from each vial. So 1 dose is wasted. Japan has begun getting vaccines, but needles will be critical to use them. It's the last member of the G7 to start its inoculation drive. Now the elderly may have to wait to get a shot.
We will not start the inoculation for the elderly until April 1st. Also, we are requesting that local governments make a plan so that we can achieve the goal of vaccinating the elderly within 2 months and 3 weeks. Once the vaccinations for the elderly begins, we would like to build a framework to complete this goal, and that remains unchanged.
The world's richest countries locked up more than 50% of the supplies. They pre-booked vaccines and still don't have the shots they need. The situation is worse for the developing world. They may have to wait until 2024 for mass immunization. Support from India may bring some relief for the developing world. The WHO has given emergency use authorization to Covishield, the made-in-India Oxford vaccine. This paves the way for a global rollout of vaccine supplies from India. Via COVAX, the vaccine alliance led by the WHO, 240 million doses of Covishield will be supplied across the world. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Foreign policy is the ultimate challenge for any world leader. It's a delicate game where balance is key. US President Joe Biden is not new to this game. In fact, he is a seasoned player. But until now, he operated behind the scenes, first as a US senator and then as deputy to the US president. Now he's stepping out from the shadows to run his own show. His first challenge is to tame a rogue ally, Turkey. American and Turkish interests do not converge anymore. The relationship has been rocky for a while now. What kept it intact was the personal equation between Trump and Erdogan. During Trump's presidency, Turkey repeatedly provoked Washington, first with the purchase of the Russian S-400 missiles and then with an attack on Kurdish fighters, and both times Trump's response was reluctant to say the least. Biden arrived on the scene promising change. No more hobnobbing with autocrats, he said. No long rope for rogue allies like Turkey. This is what Joe Biden said about President Erdogan in an interview last year, and I'm quoting, "He is an autocrat. He is the president of Turkey and a lot more. I'm still of the view that we can support those elements of the Turkish leadership that still exist and embolden them to be able to take on and defeat Erdogan, not by a coup, but by electoral process." That was Joe Biden openly saying that he would back a change of regime in Turkey. His actions so far suggest the same. Joe Biden has not spoken to Erdogan yet, but his administration has rebuked Turkey multiple times. First, they demanded the release of an activist. Then they condemned Erdogan's homophobic rhetoric against student protesters. But the Turkish president is unmoved. He is intent on digging old graves. On Sunday, Turkey accused the Kurdistan Workers' Party of executing 13 Turks, 1-3. The United States condemned the attack. Erdogan called the US statement a joke. He's openly accusing America of supporting terrorists.
Now there is a statement made by the United States. It's a joke. Were you not supposed to stand against the terrorists, the PKK, the YPG and PYD? You clearly support them and stand behind them. If we are together with you in NATO, if we are to continue our unity in the world and in NATO, then you will act sincerely towards us. Then you will stand with us, not with terrorists.
For the record, the United States has designated the Kurdistan Workers' Party as a terrorist group. During the war against ISIS, they had allied with another Kurdish militia called the YPG. They did not join hands with the Workers' Party. The question of Kurdish fighters will always be a thorn behind Turkey and America, though. The Kurdish alliance was created by Barack Obama, Biden's former boss. So he has a personal stake here. All indications are that Biden wants to be an activist president. He's talking about holding a democracy summit later this year. Erdogan may not feature in Biden's plan, but the country he rules does. Turkey is a strategic ally of Washington. Both Erdogan and Biden want to reset ties, but a reset means different things for different people. And for these two leaders, for Biden, it's a return to a US-led liberal world order. For Erdogan, a reset is a new geopolitical reality in Eurasia, one where Turkey is the big dog. If and when Biden does dial Erdogan, it should be an interesting phone call. Beyond a rogue ally, Biden must also contend with an old foe, Iran. Biden wants to return to the Iran nuclear deal, but Tehran is not making it easy for him. On Monday, a volley of rockets was fired at the American military base in Erbil in Iraq. One civilian military contractor was killed, 8 others were injured. It was the deadliest attack on coalition troops in a year. The perpetrators were Aulia al-Dam. It's a little-known Shia group, one of the many proxies paid and backed by Iran. America's top diplomat condemned the attack. He's promising action against those responsible. But Joe Biden is reluctant to pursue military operations against Iran. He wants to repair the nuclear deal. But he wants Iran to comply with the terms first. Many predicted a thaw in US-Iran ties with Biden in office. What we are getting instead is a stalemate. Leaders invest a lot in foreign policy. It's a sure shot way to cement your legacy, but sometimes it can trip you up. One foreign policy blunder can define an entire presidency. Just ask George Bush. As for Joe Biden, he's got the experience, he's got the mandate. But does he have the appetite for a battle of attrition? A couple more months and we'll have the answer. And this, by the way, is not the only conflict that's brewing in West Asia. The war in Yemen is in focus again, the so-called forgotten war. The world remembers it only when the war begins to reflect in their petrol bills. And it's happening again. Tensions are flaring. The Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen are attacking Saudi targets. Investors are spooked. Oil prices are skyrocketing. A conflict happening thousands of miles away is interfering in our personal expenses. This report has all the details.
Geopolitics can be a brain churner. Here's a crash course for the uninitiated.
Allahu Akbar!
There is renewed fighting in Yemen. Iran-backed Houthis are stepping up their assault on Saudi forces. Close by, the Americans are hunting for Iranian oil tankers. West Asia is on the edge, and you don't need to live there to know that. A trip to your local gas station should be enough. Oil prices are soaring. On Monday, they reached a 13-month high. Brent crude was up almost 2%. At one point, it was trading at $63.76 per barrel. The last time we saw these rates was in January 2020. The US and Iran were almost at war after Qasem Soleimani's assassination. Two theatres of conflict have reignited. First in Yemen, where the Houthis have launched a fresh offensive. Their target is the government's last stronghold, Marib. The attacks are spilling over into Saudi Arabia, a key backer of the Yemeni government. Last week, the rebels launched a drone strike. 4 hits in the heart of Saudi Arabia's Aba airport. One civilian aircraft burst into flames. There was another attempt on Sunday. An explosive-laden drone was fired towards the kingdom. This time it was intercepted and destroyed. Such brazen attacks will surely elicit a response. When and where is the question. Close by in the Persian Gulf, the standoff is between the US and Iran. The Americans are in search of Iranian oil tankers. They believe Iran is circumventing sanctions and exporting oil to countries like Venezuela. Is it just political uncertainties that are driving up oil prices? No, some of it is choreographed. The OPEC members in Russia are holding back on production, a time-tested policy to drive up prices. In America, the COVID stimulus bill is on track for approval. This will help small businesses. Oil markets love a good recovery, especially when it involves the world's biggest consumer. Chances are neither you nor your country is party to these conflicts, but you feel the pinch. Every time you fill up the tank, crude rallies inevitably drive up fuel prices. In India's Bhopal, extra premium petrol crossed the 100 rupee mark. Some gas stations had to shut down because their analog meters could only display 2 digits. Petrol and diesel are selling at record rates. In New Delhi, a litre of petrol is now worth 89 rupees. Diesel is going at 79.35. Fuel prices have risen for a 7th straight day. The government isn't planning to cut taxes, which means the only relief will come when global oil prices correct. Peace in West Asia can guarantee steady oil prices, but as historians will tell you, that is asking for too much. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Antarctica, a continent that has captured our imagination for centuries. This land of extremes is famous for keeping its secrets. A British team of scientists has unraveled a new one. They found life 3,000 feet beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. They claim there are creatures living there far from sunlight and any obvious source of food. How do they survive? Here's what we know so far.
On the southernmost tip of this planet lies the frozen desert of Antarctica, a place not many would want to call home. It is the highest, driest, coldest and windiest place on Earth. The conditions make life relatively sparse compared to other regions. But the British Atlantic Survey's accidental discovery of sea life has challenged our understanding of Antarctica. Scientists recently drilled a 900-meter thick hole in the Filchner-Ronne ice shelf. They dropped a camera down the hole with the aim of finding mud on the seabed. But to their surprise, they ended up discovering life, buried 3,000 feet under the ice sheet. The creatures were found attached to a boulder. The footage released appears to show 2 types of unidentified stationary organisms. The creatures in red seem to have long stalks, while the ones highlighted in white look more like round sponge-like animals, all living in -2 degrees Celsius water. The boulder is located 260 kilometers away from open water, far from sunlight and any obvious source of nutrients. Scientists say the discovery proves that life in Antarctica's harsh environments is more adaptable and more diverse than believed earlier. But the finding also throws up more questions than answers. There's no confirmation on which species these creatures belong to, if they're new to science, how long they've lived, how often they breed, and how exactly are they coping with the extreme conditions. For now, drilling more boreholes in the ice seems to be the only option to unlock the answers. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
What is Japan known for? Well, you may be thinking sushi, cars, cherry blossom, cool toilets, and you'd be right. But did you know that Japan is also known for loneliness? Why are we bringing this up tonight? Because Japan has appointed a Minister of Loneliness. In case you're wondering why, let me give you some numbers. In Japan, there are 14.9 suicides for every 100,000 individuals. This is according to the OECD, or the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Japan has one of the highest suicide rates in the world. If you follow Gravitas, you'd already know this by now. Japan's suicide rate is the highest among the G7 nations. Government data says nearly 21,000 people died by suicide in 2020, 750 more than 2019. This is the first time suicide numbers in the country have increased since 2009. That was the year following the global financial crisis. In the year one of the Wuhan virus, Japan saw an increase in suicide among women. At least 440 students from elementary school, middle school and high school died by suicide. The number as of November 2020 is the highest since 1980. Experts say many of these deaths have to do with health, economic problems and loneliness. So the country has a new loneliness minister, Tetsushi Sakamoto. He will be working towards reducing social isolation and protecting ties between people. Sakamoto heads a unique ministry. He may find inspiration in recent history. In 2016, the United Arab Emirates appointed a Minister of Happiness. In 2017, the portfolio became Happiness and Well-being. In July 2020, it was transferred to the Ministry of Community Development. And you would be amazed to learn that Sakamoto also has a predecessor. Former British Prime Minister Theresa May had appointed a Minister of Loneliness. In 2018, Tracy Crouch was given the responsibility to tackle social isolation among the elderly in Britain. This is what the world has come to. You need a minister to deal with these things. Will a minister alone be able to fight Japan's loneliness epidemic? Here's what a headline in the UK says. 2 years after hiring a Minister of Loneliness, people in the UK are still lonely. We really hope Japan's story is different. On that note, slipping into a short break, we'll be back with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
WION now available in the United States. Download the app now.